Hi, glad to see you on your channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. Have a good view. Unidentified flying objects, more commonly referred to simply as UFOs, have been observed since ancient times, but intuitively, eyewitnesses and commentators have associated them with aeronautics or aviation. The turning point in public perception came in the summer of 1947, when American businessman Kenneth Arnold said that flying on a light engine Call-Air A-2 observed 9 strange apparatus in the shape of a crescent moon, which with supersonic speed carried over the Cascade Mountains, Washington. Trying to find an analogy when describing the mysterious objects, Arnold used different but similar words: saucer, disc, and pie pan. It is believed that since then it has become a tradition to call UFOs flying saucer. Arnold's statement itself would hardly have stirred up the public, but representatives of the U.S. Army Air Force showed interest in it. They told the press that no groups of planes, including experimental, were not in the area on June 24th, when the businessman pilot observed his UFOs. Inspired by the new, unusual topic, newspapers brought the story of Arnold on the front pages, after which the editorial office shaft went to the letters with eyewitness testimony, claiming as if they too had seen flying saucers. Later researchers found that during 1947, 853 reports of UFOs were published in 140 newspapers in the United States and Canada. Although authorities eventually announced that Arnold had observed a specific mirage, he himself considered the flying saucers to be a product of high technology. In a July 19th interview with the Associated Press, he stated the following: "If the Army has no explanation for the origin of the discs, then they, and I know this sounds crazy, they must be from another planet." Of course, Arnold's hypothesis caused not only additional interest in the incident, but also criticism and ridicule. So he took to actively promoting his point of view, giving articles and lengthy interviews. In 1952, he even published a book, The Coming of the Saucers, in which, on the basis of his own observations and testimony of other eyewitnesses, once again argued, unidentified objects are of extraterrestrial origin. In the 10 years after Arnold's observation, countless documented testimonies accumulated, which some experts called a saucer boom, others called hysteria and psychosis. At the same time, the term ufology emerged in its original sense, implying a movement of enthusiasts who are engaged in collecting and summarizing information about UFOs. It is well seen that Sanderson made 2 key errors. First, he stated that science is so illusion-defying that it is supposedly willing to erase entire pages from the history of observation. Although this is not true. For example, no one is going to erase geocentrism from history, and one of the virtues of science is that it constantly revises generally accepted views. Secondly, he immediately made it clear that ufology will classify unidentified objects based on the assumption of their extraterrestrial origin, which is an extraordinary hypothesis that requires a separate and very serious justification. Accepting such an assumption, we find ourselves in a situation where we have to appeal not to knowledge, but to fiction. Otherwise, how can we distinguish a UFO of extraterrestrial origin from a UFO of extragalactic or even universal origin? Is it possible to scientifically discuss such hypothetical constructions, if even to specifically postulate that all flying saucers have an alien nature? Probably, similar considerations occurred to those who thought about the phenomenon of UFOs in the early 50s. So, along with the hypothesis of extraterrestrial origin of flying saucers, arose a theory that offered a more down-to-earth explanation. During the war years, there were many new flying machines, which were created in Germany, Italy, and Japan to fight the armies of the Allies in the anti-Hitler coalition. British and American pilots flying combat missions were occasionally unable to identify the objects they were observing, and over time, a kind of military folklore developed. In November 1944, pilots from the U.S. 415th Night Fighter Squadron reported seeing fast-moving glowing objects of bright red, orange, and even white colors during raids over Western Europe. Some eyewitnesses compared them to Christmas tree lights, which, however, easily change speed and direction of flight. The objects usually accompanied the aircraft in formation and behaved reasonably without showing hostility. The 415th Squadron radar operator, Donald Myers, called them Foo Fighters, using the slang word foo, derived from comic books, meaning something strange that has no accurate description. On December 13, 1944, the Allied General Command in Paris issued a press release about UFOs, which was published in the New York Times the next day. It officially recognized the high-speed glowing orbs as a new German weapon. Subsequent retellings using the term Foo Fighters appeared in the American New York Herald Tribune and the British The Daily Telegraph. It should be said that at that time such news did not surprise anyone. At the end of the war, Nazi propaganda constantly trumpeted the use of weapons of retaliation, Vergeltungswaffen, V-Waffen, and the Germans backed up their words with deeds. The Allies in the anti-Hitler coalition had the opportunity to see in action unmanned aircraft destroyers, V-1, V-1, heavy ballistic missiles, V-2, V-2, and rocket fighters, Messerschmitt Me 163 Comet. There were no analogs of such unusual aircraft in other countries, so the high command was used to expect surprises from the enemy. Since after the war, experts working on the ruins of Germany did not find any technology that could be associated with Foo Fighters, the phenomenon was given an even more prosaic explanation. Most likely, the pilots observed St. Elmo's lights, discharges arising at the sharp ends of objects at high electric field strength in the atmosphere. The strangest cases were attributed to optical illusions and visual effects arising from short-term blindness by enemy anti-aircraft fire. Secrets of discs. The Foo Fighters were remembered during the saucer boom of 1947. It was probably then that a conspiracy theory appeared, according to which not all original Nazi technology fell into the hands of the anti-Hitler coalition allies. In those years, there were ominous rumors in Europe and the United States that the leaders of the Third Reich, including Hitler, managed to escape just punishment, that somewhere still operate secret underground bases, that the Nazis are preparing to deliver a new, terrible, and crushing blow to the world. Combining one assumption with another was not difficult. For example, in March 1946, the American science fiction writer Robert Heinlein wrote his first young adult novel, later published as Rocket Ship Galileo, 1947. It told how, in the not-too-distant future, three teenagers, under the guidance of a brilliant physicist, attach an atomic engine to an old mail rocket and fly it to the moon. There they meet Hitlerites who have escaped from Earth and set up a base in the ancient ruins of the city of Selenites. The Italian tabloids were the first to report the secret technology as a substantiated allegation rather than a fantasy story. In March 1950, Professor Giuseppe Belluzzo, who specialized in steam turbines and in the late 20s served as Minister of Public Education in the government of Benito Mussolini, reported in an interview with the Roman newspaper Il Giornale d'Italia that in 1942, a group of Italian engineers studied the aerodynamics of disc-shaped flying machines, building a 10-meter model, and that perhaps after 8 years in this direction has achieved a breakthrough, which can explain the appearance of numerous flying saucers in the sky. Belluzzo emphasized that we are talking about unmanned experimental vehicles. Although almost immediately followed by a denial from the Italian Air Force, whose representative said that no experiments with saucers are conducted, Belluzzo's interview was circulated by the newspapers Corriere della Sera, La Nazione, Gazzetta del Popolo, and Corriere d'Informazione. Using Belluzzo's report, the Spanish evening newspaper Madrid claimed that Hitler and his entourage had fled to the Himalayas and were launching flying saucers from there, preparing revenge for their defeat in the World War. The news penetrated the German press as well. On March 30th, aircraft engineer Rudolf Schriever told the weekly Der Spiegel that since January 1942, he had been developing a project for a flying Flugkreisel and had even built a prototype at a factory in Prague. In April 1945, he completed the work and was going to send a set of drawings to Hermann Göring, but by that time the front had collapsed, and all the project materials went to Soviet specialists. A careful study of the description of Shriver's Wolf and the picture published in Der Spiegel leads to the conclusion that it was a helicopter-like aircraft. It was a disc consisting of a rim and blades, which rotated rapidly like the impeller of a fan. In the center of the rotating part was a fixed hemispherical cockpit. 3 jet engines were to be attached to the lower plane, giving torque to the structure. When, after vertical takeoff, the vehicle was in the air, the 2 thrusters located on the lower part of the cockpit would be activated. Although Shriver assured that the flying spinner was never built, his account was later used to support the theory that the observed UFOs were created in the Third Reich. Throughout April 1950, German tabloids published stories about Hitler's flying saucers, citing Beluzzo and Shriver. The story began to be supplemented with fantastic details, and it was claimed that all project materials had gone to the USSR. Given the secrecy surrounding the advanced Soviet scientific and technological programs, the question of whether anything useful could be extracted from these materials was simply not raised. For a while, the hype died down. It resumed in June 1952, when the French press reported on a certain Dr. Richard Mithe, allegedly engaged in the development of flying saucers for the Luftwaffe and achieved considerable success. Stories about him accompanied by a photograph of tests of German experimental apparatus over the Baltic Sea on April 17, 1944, although very poor quality. Since then, the mysterious Dr. Mithe, one of the developers of the disco plane V7, V7, or Vril 7, Vril 7, can be found in almost all books devoted to flying saucers Nazis. But, as a thorough search for ufologists, he is a fictional figure, and those who mention him cannot determine where Mithe was after the war. Some write that he was transported and disappeared to the USSR, others that he emigrated to the US and worked on the Canadian military project VZ9 Avrokar. The aforementioned Rudolf Schriever, who was interested in obtaining patents for his spinner, joined the sensation. In the magazine Deutschen Illustrierten, he stated that he started the development of his apparatus back in 1941, and in June 1942, successful tests took place. As a result, the patent was obtained, which the German aircraft engineer joyfully announced to the world. In 1956, the book Die deutschen Waffen und Geheimwaffen des Zweiten Weltkrieges und ihre Weiterentwicklung, which was soon translated into English. Its author signed himself as Major Rudolf Lutzar and claimed to have worked in the patent office, so he had access to the most secret projects of the Third Reich. In addition to the story of jet engines, telecontrol systems, proximity fuses, airplane shells, and rockets, Lutzar mentioned flying saucers, listing among their designers familiar names, Shriver, Mithe, and Belonzo, as he called Professor Beluzzo. If you believe the Major, in the Third Reich, there were 2 centers for the production of flying saucers. In Prague and Breslau, Wroclaw. In the first worked Shriver, in the second, the mythical Dr. Mithe. Only Shriver managed to achieve success. During tests in February 1945, his saucer for 3 minutes gained altitude of 12,400 meters, then developed a speed of 2,000 km/h. After the war, the technology was taken over by the USSR and the USA, where it continues to be improved. The legend gained concrete content, but even this was not enough. Conspiracy theorists, who were working on the occult secrets of the Third Reich, got involved. In 1960, Frenchmen Jacques Bergier and Louis Pauvel published the book Le Matin des Magiciens, Introduction au Réalisme Fantastique, which had a great influence on the formation of the European crypto-historical tradition of the post-war period. In it, they, in particular, told about the Berlin secret society Vril Gesellschaft, which allegedly established contacts with an ancient civilization that hides in underground cities. German conspiracy theorist Ernst Zundel, interested in ufology, published in 1974 the book UFOs, Nazi Secret Weapon, in which he combined the occult myth with the saucers. Moreover, he claimed that German secret societies not only managed to build new flying machines operating on unknown physical principles, but also transported with their help the leadership of the Third Reich to a secret base in Antarctica. Zundel later retracted his words, admitting that he had invented the story to attract attention, but the deed was done. The version of the legend of saucers in Antarctica took on a life of its own. Adamski's lamp. In modern books and articles devoted to Hitler's saucers, you can meet sketches and even photos of the flying machine Haunebu 10, which used, allegedly, anti-gravity. And it is strikingly similar to interplanetary ships, Venusians, with which contacted ufologist George Adamski. A Polish immigrant, Adamski had only a high school education and was a laborer, but got involved with American occultists, after which he founded the Royal Order of Tibet, which he himself headed. At the end of World War II, he became interested in ufology and claimed to have made contact with light-haired, light-skinned humanoids from Venus and Saturn, who drove him through space on their flying saucers, showing him, among other things, the backside of the moon, where Adamski saw bodies of water, forests, animals, and buildings. When the Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 in October 1959 transmitted the first ever photos of the other side, and there, of course, no signs of life were found, Adamski found nothing better than to accuse the Russians of falsification, say they deliberately falsified the images to mislead the world community. Adamski presented his views and stories about contacts with aliens in the books Flying Saucers Have Landed, 1953, and Inside the Spaceships, 1955, which became bestsellers. By 1960, more than 200,000 copies were sold. In them, one can also find photographs depicting a disc-shaped Venusian ship named Orthon. However, Adamski's photo works, if you can call them that, were exposed back in 1955 by German rocket scientist Walter Riedel, who showed that the image published by the contactor is a lamp for heating a chicken brooder. It turns out that for many years, for the image of the German Discolé with an anti-gravity engine, we are given a picture of an old lamp. Despite the revelations, the legend lives on. In 1978, Chilean diplomat with occult views Miguel Serrano published El Cordón Dorado, Hitlerismo Esotérico, in which he asserted the Antarctic version and predicted that Hitler would soon bring a fleet of UFOs to conquer the world. Former SS man Wilhelm Landig released the sci-fi trilogy Thule, 1971-1991, in which he combined vague information about German occult societies with a mythical base in Antarctica served by flying saucers. In the 90s, the theme was exploited by such authors as the Englishman Alan Harbinson, the German Jan Halley, published under the meaningful pseudonym John Van Helsing, and the Bulgarian Vladimir Terziski. The latter reworked the legend into an even more incredible version, claiming that members of the society Vril, on their saucers in 1942, landed on the moon, where they established a base, which is still in operation today. However, there is no point in discussing later versions of the legend, because it all, in fact, grew out of interviews with Italian professor Belluzzo and German engineer Schriever. The testimonies of these men themselves look dubious, but even if they were telling the truth, the overall assessment of the situation would not change. Yes, German engineers produced many amazing technical innovations during the war years, which amazed the imagination of contemporaries. No doubt, the possibility of building disco planes was also studied. But since then, decades have passed, thousands of documents have been declassified, memoirs of participants of events and studies of historians have been published. We have learned many interesting details about German airplanes, jets and rocket planes, ballistic missiles, etc. But no fundamentally new information about flying saucers has not appeared, only retellings of old tales with additions from fantasy literature. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. See you soon.